in e-discovery and related areas.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select Resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest this week is Florinda Baldridge. Florinda is the U.S. Director of Global eDiscovery and Litigation Technology at Norton Rose Fulbright. She leads a team of over 30 lawyers and technologists who provide eDiscovery solutions to the firm's large dispute practice. Florinda has been working in the eDiscovery space for over 20 years. I think it's longer than that, Florinda, and has joined us today to discuss her thoughts and experience in an area that's affecting businesses throughout the globe. Today, it's Cybersecurity Day here. So cybersecurity breaches, data breaches, and the state of eDiscovery challenges in cyber incident response matters. Florinda, welcome. Glad to have you with us.
Hi, glad to be here, George. I was trying to balance not disclosing my age, but still showing some sort of gravitas in the space. So I think you exposed me.
No, you were a child prodigy. You started working on eDiscovery matters at the ripe age of 3.
Exactly right. And so it's great to be with you, George, as I was preparing for this. And as we think about being disconnected from our peers and colleagues, you know, that we have known throughout the years, I was thinking about remembering being in St. Paul in your office back in 2005, 2006, as we were working through the EDRM. And the thing that I remember, while that was a momentous time, the thing I remember most is that I couldn't get a cab in downtown St. Paul, just walking out onto the street. So I got pretty smart after by the second trip, right, and made those arrangements while everybody was milling around on the corner.
Well, in St. Paul, getting a cab may still be a challenge today, but at least now there's Uber and the like. And yes, you were one of that merry band, if you will, at the very first EDRM planning meeting.
Yep. That was a really exciting time when you look back. What is that, 15 years later?
Yeah, that was May of 2005.
Yeah, and a lot of smart people and that are still around today, came out of that space. And the topic that I want to address today sort of ties back to where we were in eDiscovery at that time. And I'll some may think that I'm, off on that assessment, but I'd like to use this time to kind of talk about why.
Go ahead. Let's dive into that, and I'll let you know whether I think you're off on that assessment.
Okay, well, that's good. Please, it'll make it more interesting. Just challenge away. So good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm not a lawyer, so I will not be addressing any of the cybersecurity legal issues. And I'm probably not going to tell you anything that you don't already know. So what I wanted to do today is really just have a dialogue and put some thoughts out there to the key stakeholders that are impacted by the ever increasing cybersecurity attacks. I think you all know that these attacks have become more egregious in nature through malware and ransomware. High value data is being targeted. The volume of the data that is taken is in the terabytes. And that process that a company or firm must go through from the time of the breach to the point of notifying regulators, individuals, their customers, is a very compressed timeline. Think about it in terms of, expedited discovery and second requests times 10.
So how compressed is very compressed? Are we talking months, weeks, days, hours?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, because the states are still, the regulations across states varies a bit. So you have to evaluate the states implicated. But on the average, you can think about 60 days from the time that you identify that there was even one data element that was breached and meets the definition of PII or PHI. And there's some legislation out there. I didn't get to finish reading the article, but there's some legislation pending that's looking to even further shrink that time from breach to notification, whether it's a notification to a regulator or to individuals. And then in between that time, the desire and the interest of the company to notify their customers, right? They've got to at least make some contact and some initial notification to their customers because many of these breaches are already hitting the press. So, so the C-suite is obviously and understandably really nervous about getting information quickly. So we're dealing with terabytes of data, trying to apply the traditional e-discovery processes and technology to something that was never intended to be, right? And so that is the subject of the discussion today is.
So a question on that.
Please.
The company learns there's been a breach. It's got, let's say, 60 days to either start or finish notifying people. Either way, if it doesn't hit that deadline, what sort of penalties or problems does it face?
Okay, now you're asking me a question that is better suited to the David Kesslers of the world, right?
Yeah, but we don't have David here. So is it a question of fines? Is it a question of reputational damage?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are, some kind of regulatory penalties. But again, that is not my space, so I'm not speaking with assurance. But there's certain business implications, right? There's the PR implications, and some even, consider that with almost every breach of that scope, there's probably a litigation right behind it. Mm-hmm. So the issue is not only the timeliness and the risk of any missed deadlines, and then the business implications to the corporation, but then there's the litigation that may follow about the company's practices around data retention, data security, and then litigation that might implicate the process of the breach notification, right? Mm-hmm. So at every point, you're dealing with not only a compressed timeline, a lot of unknowns. The threat actor is still publishing, in the ransomware concept, they're publishing things to the dark web, and that's the threat, right, for the ransom. So there's all these issues going on around us, and we're trying to get the data. The really interesting thing, and we found this in one of the matters with one of the providers, is the data comes from the dark web, and the providers don't want to put it on their network, right? And some still don't have a lab space to scrub it. if it isn't done by one of the forensic vendors, the CrowdStrike Mandiants of the world. And so, in one instance, a recent one, even there's the equivalent of a novel virus, right, in this space, where even the experts around forensics have not yet even developed the necessary, if you will, immunization or the antidotes, right, to just scrub and clean the data before you send it on to review and extraction. So, that's another challenge where the e-discovery vendors are, and I'll speak to each of the stakeholders in this area, where I think we're all, needing to adjust the way that we handle these matters that is different than the way we would handle a traditional e-discovery matter for disputes.
So it sounds like, to put a highly technical label on things, this is a hot mess.
It is indeed a hot mess, right? And we're kind of swatting at it, and I don't mean that in a derogatory tone, other than to say we're all smart people in the industry and we're all committed to doing the best for our clients. But what is still emerging is the technology, and we've been sort of, and I was thinking back, over the years of doing these matters, and they were smaller, and we could do them in our traditional e-discovery platform, and we would brute force the entity extraction to some spreadsheet, and then we bring that spreadsheet back together, and then we put it back into the database, and we do these brute force deduping of the entity so we could do the notification. And that works in the smaller matters just fine. When you have a mailbox or a few, really targeted and small data that's been breached. But when you're talking about terabytes, we have been we can't efficiently apply all the tools that we use for traditional e-discovery. But I wanted to, was thinking back to remember even the EDRM days when we after a time we went back and added the information governance to the left of identification and preservation, right? And the issue is, and all that involves data disposition specifically for this context, but it is amazing that, and again, we're going to talk about the corporation, the vendors, the software developers, the staffing companies, the law firms. I want to sort of touch on all of them, but from even the corporate and the law firm side, just talking about data disposition. I say law firm, I mean to say corporations and companies, right, to include all that involves, all businesses. But one matter that we were involved in, you have in one corner of the network, there was, 5 years of payroll records in PDFs, right? W-2s and other things. And the process to extract all that data, right, to notify those folks. And the question was, nobody knew that data was even there, right? And it was like, where did this come from, right? So that just heightens that initiative, I think, with all of us, all companies, to really revisit the way that they are managing, handling, and disposing of legacy data that has no ongoing business value, because this is where it can come back to hurt you, unlike,
just as poor information governance can wreak havoc on an e-discovery plan and budget, the same thing happens in the data breach side of things.
That's exactly right, but with more risk and cost than in e-discovery, right? In e-discovery, you basically just sifted through it and threw bodies at it to review it, and gee whiz, it did increase your budget and you had to produce more than you probably would have otherwise had to if you hadn't retained it. In this instance, the cost is it's not just the monetary cost, but there's all the reputational damage and all the ensuing potential litigation. So yes, the impact on the data security side is even greater. So there's that consideration. When you think about the technology and how we have, I think that the e-discovery industry and the technology around it has really evolved. Remember, in the early 2000s, there was not a lot out there, and then it seems like mid 2000s, the industry really developed some great tools. TAR came into the picture, predictive analytics, all of these great tools like BrainSpace, NextLP, and all of the other proprietary products that a lot of smart software developers and e-discovery vendors have invested greatly in. So we've all benefited from that development. And what we have found is that these tools haven't exactly translated effectively to the identification of PII and PHI, right? For all the reasons we all know. And so, I sort of prognosticate and wonder if, so part of this discussion and this platform today is to exhort all those smart technology and software developers in this space to reimagine e-discovery for cyber, and will there be a time where we will have TAR for litigation for disputes and TAR for for cyber matters, a different kind of tools and technology. And that is what I encourage our colleagues on the software side to really think about this space seriously moving forward.
So I know you would like to cover the different stakeholders, and let's get to that in a moment.
Okay.
Before we get there, I'd like to hear from you some of the things you wish this technology would do that it's not doing today.
That's a really good question, because our lawyers and our teams feel that the pain of that void every day. The idea that you could identify potential PII, PHI without ever even running it through traditional processing. So you have a terabyte and you have some tech that doesn't require any particular indexing, it just goes out and analyzes a data set and says, here's all the potential PII, PHI. It doesn't even have to be perfect. It is like an initial impact assessment, right? Because the clients are just waiting. They're like on us every day. How much is it? What is it? Who is it? And so that's the first piece on the initial, identification. And then there is the more targeted and the identification through the review process, right? Rather than throwing an army, is already doing some more a deeper dive identification on a subset of that data that you may have decided to run through processing or not, right? Through that you can actually then maybe avoid e-discovery processing altogether. Just take that data, identify pot, we call it pot priv, this is pot PII, and put it into a review platform that automatically extracts what appears to be social security numbers, bank account numbers, any number of those low-hanging fruit. And then obviously there's all sorts of other identifiers for PHI and PII. But as a start, just get me started. And you can get some people, reviewers focused on that while we continue to using maybe other tools. You'll continue to use maybe some other kind of predictive analytics to do some further analysis, and being able to continue to feed that. I think there will always be a need for the human review, right? But get that whole process, identification, extraction, and review more seamless. And then the other piece is then once you extract those entities, not having to take it outside of the application, but you're doing it within the application, and then you do a deduping of the entities. That is this Joe P. Smith on Magnolia Street the same guy as Joe Smith on Magnolia Street, right? And so dedupe the entity so individuals don't receive 100 notifications, right? So that deduping is a huge component. So a very efficient, high-tech way of deduping the entities. So, and many times the clients want an initial dedupe report of whatever has already been extracted. And doing these interim deduping is always a challenge. So the ability to do that deduping within the application, not taking it outside to a SQL data, a SQL script, but doing it in the application, extracting it, deduping it, and being able to do interim, and then it's all in the application. Generate the notification report with the addresses to then send it to the Experians of the world to mail out. So that is it sounds so simple, right, as we talk about it, but it's such a
It's
slog.
not, is it?
It's a slog. That's the only way I can, we call it the data slog. But it's so critical to the key stakeholders. So
let's shift to stakeholders, and why don't you address who those key stakeholders are and some of their key concerns, and then after that, I want to make sure that we have time to hear about what you're doing.
Great. We've talked about the companies that are often the victims of that, and of these breaches. We've talked about the software vendors to talk about getting some critical thinking around these tools. The e-discovery vendors that themselves may be either adopting tools that the software developers are using, but integrating that into their review platforms. Staffing and skill sets is a huge component of this. And so retooling the teams or leveraging teams of data scientists, data analytics specialists, project managers that that are used to managing the e-discovery, the litigation matters. And then on the review, so that whole piece, the people piece, right? We're back to the, people, process, and technology. And then kind of carving out from the people and the skill sets, the profiles I just mentioned, is the review, right? What we have traditionally just thrown the typical contract reviewers at the problem, and what we're finding, and we're in our matters as we're capturing daily metrics on these reviews, we're finding. And we're seeing some providers are using non-lawyers for this that have strong Excel skills, for instance, because a lot of this PII is buried in, a spreadsheet with 20 tabs chock full of PII and PHI. And so you're doing this manual slog of extracting that data. That's not what the contract reviewers that are focused on text-driven analysis, right? It's not.
So it's review, but it's not quite like the review we're used to.
Review. It's not your grandfather's review, right? And so it is. But there's a hybrid, because many of these reviews, the client may say, I want to also do a business sensitivity review. So we bifurcated, and we might hire the lawyers, the contract lawyers, to do the business sensitive review, looking for things that are important to the client, that they want to know is out there, right? and then maybe the non-lawyers for the extraction review. And then there's the training professionals like ASEDS. Do we look at doing a certification for cyber breach, cyber incident response specialists? I know the staffing companies, True Staffing, for instance, has had some interest in this for several years, right? And building out, identifying that talent. And so I think we've talked about the clients, the software developers, the e-discovery vendors, the review vendors, the training and certification vendors, and the law firms. All of us have an opportunity to contribute our piece of this. We're all SMEs in one or more of these areas, and this is a great opportunity to really make some advances there. I think we have 6 to 9 months to maybe a year where those that figure it out are gonna get to a status of being able to capture the market, and that sort of is a segue to in the past few months we interviewed about 12 to 13 vendors, and we had a very deliberate process, and we started with our team, the technical team, doing the initial contact, ending with our partners. We have 3 cybersecurity partners that are very engaged, and 5 or 6 associates. And we took to them, out of those 13, we reduced it to those that we would put in front of them, and basically said, okay, go at it, because it was there, and they're very good at what they do, and they're very technical. And what we have found in that process, and in that, the lawyers and us uniformly agreed that there was 2 that we would be our primary. And
these are providers of services, right?
Of e-discovery technology and the services piece, right?
Yep.
And so I think back to that issue, and we're doing the best that we can with some, there's custom scripting and some bespoke kind of technology that these providers have done. There's a lot of opportunity for continued development in that space. And the one thing that we did as part of that whole reassessing how we were handling those matters was then the people part, our own team. And what we had been doing is we were using our project managers and those folks on that did dispute matters were also supporting some cyber matters. And we learned that those 2 don't, they may be working on 4 or 5 litigation matters, and one breach matter comes along and consumes their entire existence. So we learned that what we decided to do is we bifurcated the organization, and we're having e-discovery dispute team and an e-discovery cyber team. And so we are in the process of, we've been interviewing and are going to hire a team for cyber. So I'm going to shamelessly recruit on this call those of you that are out there that have an interest. Solid e-discovery skills will train on the cyber, but I think so that is, that's sort of what we have found that we need to do to better service these clients and to not create complete burnout. So that's sort of our story.
Well, it's quite the story. And it's an interesting extension, isn't it, from the more traditional world of e-discovery and how we've seen it develop over the past 20 years.
Yep.
to what is happening with data breach and cybersecurity. Any closing thoughts or comments?
Well, I think I sort of, my closing and most critical thought was those of you that are out there that are interested in a new path, but leveraging your existing skills. I believe this is a really growing and thriving market. Think about, retooling yourself to this, because there's more demand for these folks than there are supply of experienced people. We found they exist mainly in the vendor world. Those that are doing it well have some really good people. So that is what I would say. If you have an interest to maybe pursue another aspect of e-discovery, this is certainly one to watch.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks, Florinda. Florinda Baldridge is the U.S. Director of Global E-Discovery and Litigation Technology at Norton Rose Fulbright. I am George Socha. This has been E-Discovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Please join us again next week, Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Thanks, Florinda.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.